Welcome everybody to Optometric Education Consultants National Webinar Series, Sunday night edition. Tonight's presentation topic is Challenges and Controversies in Prescribing Pharmaceuticals, a conversation and discussion between an optometrist and a pharmacist. Our speakers tonight are our own Greg Caldwell, and he is being joined by OEC's longtime friend, Tracy Offerdahl, who is a PharmD pharmacist practicing clinical pharmacist. She got her PharmD degree in residency at Temple University. She is on staff at Salus University, and she teaches at Pennsylvania College of Optometry and all the pharmacology courses to the health professions at Salus. So please, and she is one of the really top speakers, top minds. Is love to hear how things just roll off her tongue so easily, and she's just super, super smart. So they're going to make a great team. So with that, guys, take it away.
Thanks, Joe, and appreciate the nice introduction. One thing I want to point out for Tracy here too is there are pharmacists and ODs in the academy, but Tracy went to the academy and she is a fellow of the academy. So she went through it. So congratulations on that, Tracy.
Thank you.
So here are my disclosures. I don't really think much that I talk about tonight will really affect this, but I will hit the highlights of what I have to say. Here is the content and the activity was independently prepared by me and Tracy. Here are my list of lecturers and companies that I've worked with recently. And then the content and the format of this course is presented without any commercial bias and does not claim any superiority. And I think you guys figured out that Joe and I are the owners of Optometric Education Consultants. But all of these relationships have been mitigated. Tracy?
Not a lot to add. Again, we've created this slide set and presentation independently, and there's no commercial bias. And again, all relevant relationships have been mitigated.
Thank you. So the course design, this really tonight is to be, Tracy and I, we hang out, we travel a lot together. As Joe said, she's been a friend. I think we're going now on 10, maybe 15 years. I forget the first time that we lectured together. And it was great. And we just stayed lecturing together. And, I use her as phone a friend. And there's times when we're sitting around in class or traveling together or just at the bar or whatever. And I just throw a question out and she goes into this, as Joe said, a nice detailed way of explaining it. And it's as if we're out to dinner having a discussion. Here is what I kind of want to have this conversation, things that I've learned that I just wanted to kind of pass along. This is something Joe and I have done in the past. Questions can go into the chat box, but I think, everyone can see them. So I think sometimes that bridles it. So I did put my cell phone number in the chat. And I can do that when I do a dual lecture. If you want to throw me a question via the cell phone, I'll get it. That's my cell phone, 814-931-2030. The only I guess caveat I'll throw out is if you're in my address book, I'll know who you are. If you're not in my address book, we'll just show up as a number and city and state that pops up whenever you're not in someone's address book. So there it is. If you want to text a question as we go through. So I'm going to start off here with polling question number 1 right off the bat. And let's see if I got it working. Yes. So we're going to talk just basically branded and generics here first. This was a conversation that, that came up. There's branded and then they go generic. And then there's the branded companies that have a generic line. And then we saw the artificial tiers. And, my thought process, is that, when it comes to drops, to me, it's being branded is pretty important, but maybe not so much with maybe the orals. So I'll just kind of have Tracy kind of run through here as I show a few slides. And as Joe said, let her kind of take the wheel and do some talking for us. So I never use branded medications, only use generics. I prefer branded, only use branded medications. I prefer branded medications, but use generic medications when appropriate. And I prefer generic medications, but use branded medications when appropriate. All right. So we've got a good response. So I'm just going to end that. Thanks for being synchronous and interactive with the questions. And 59% here, Trace, go for I prefer medication for branded medications, but use generic when appropriate. So I'm gonna leave
Pretty
that up
good.
there so everyone can read it. So here's where I'm going with this is last year, Combigan went generic, and it was made by this Apotex Corporation, Brimonidine, and Timolol. I think we're all familiar that, it's, 5, 10, 15 milliliters. This was a screenshot right from their website. That's the source of this. And then, it wasn't until just a few weeks later that a patient came in with it. And she showed me the bottle, or he showed me the bottle, and it's, Brimonidine, tartrate, so on and so forth. And then I saw that there it is. There's that Apotex Corporation. Decided to take a look at it, but then kind of like most generics, when they're going to go generic, the company will have a line, and it says right here Allergan, right? So I think we all know the Combigan was by Allergan. And then right here is their kind of distribution line that's out there. We saw that with latanoprost. And so when latanoprost was generic, I always was kind of happy when I saw Greenstone on the package, because basically it was the Pfizer line. In my mind is, Pfizer opens up a generic company and it's basically the same formula. So you're kind of getting those same active and inactive ingredients that's out there. And then, we have this right here. We have just recently, October 31st, FDA eye drop recall. Don't use these, CVS, Rite Aid. So now we're going back to, I was asking my patients were coming in. Oh, I heard about these eye drops. I just say, hey, look, just stay with the branded ones at the store. Don't get the ones that says, equivalent, because it's the active ingredients equivalent, not the inactive ingredients. And that's what kind of leads to the problem, so on and so forth. So I was just kind of teeing that all up. So Trace, wherever you want to go with that, the kind of the slides that are in here, tell me when to advance, and just kind of, we're sitting at dinner. Tell me about branded versus generic and things that we just talked about.
All right. So, of course, there are very specific definitions that come from the FDA regarding brand versus generic, and coming up with what they call an AB rated equivalent. When you hear the term AB rated, that means that it is considered to be an appropriate and not identical, but equivalent generic to a brand name product. And as Greg mentioned, there are lots of companies, branded companies, that will make the generic. They're one of the first ones to sign up and say, hey, we'll make the generic too, with the generic, by opening a generic company, whatever the case may be. And of course, that makes sense, because from a financial perspective, once something goes brand, it's harder than heck to get insurance companies to pay for brand anymore. So then they're making money on the generic end as well. But the FDA definition of generic is the drug product is comparable to the brand product or the reference product or the trade product in dosage form and strength, route of administration, quality, performance characteristics, and indications. So it looks pretty good on paper, if you will. True generics, there is no concern regarding the safety or efficacy of the formulation compared to the brand. And of course, as we look at, systemic meds and even topical meds that are not ocular or ophthalmic products, this pretty much holds true. Generic manufacturers are typically required by the FDA to demonstrate equivalence to get FDA approval of the generic to be listed as a generic equivalent. But as we move to the next slide, and throughout the next few, you're going to see that there's some downsides, and some of these you probably already knew. Did you know that most ophthalmic solutions are not mandated to prove therapeutic equivalence? Which just seems crazy. So the FDA is essentially saying, oh, you have, brimonidine in that bottle. Well, the brand has brimonidine, it's the same concentration. So I guess they're the same. They're both solutions or suspensions or emulsions or gels or ointments. And, we know it's a very easy thing to say, It's actually not necessarily equivalent. The FDA does not require pharmacokinetic assays and strict demonstration of human bioequivalence for ophthalmic meds. And mainly it's because we cannot directly measure bioequivalence in the human eye, or in any eyeball for that matter. So there was a date, a line in the sand, if you will, 1992. Anything prior to 1992 that was approved and marketed does not need to have the match of the inactive ingredients. Anything after 1992, in general, some of the inactive ingredients have to be identical. And that's a good thing. However, there's a whole list, which you see at the bottom there, where it says excipients. Excipients just means inactive ingredients that can differ. The preservatives can be different from brand to generic, the pH adjusters, the thickening agents, the buffers, etc. And all of these, even though they're individually innocuous or inert, so to speak, when you put all of this together, you can have problems and differences from brand to generic for sure.
I think that becomes important when it comes more to the glaucoma medications that are out there. If we're trying to treat an infection like Maxitrol or Tobradex, doctor in a bottle, that we use all the time. But I think that sometimes gets a little concerning when we see fluctuations with glaucoma meds. And, there's a lot that the branded go, and I think we're going to talk about it, Trace, but it just popped into my head, but like a lot of bottle testing that goes in with like the branded and, the how it squeezes and the hole size and so on and so forth. And I don't think any of the generics are have to do that. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
They can do it, but most don't. And that's what Greg was just mentioning, potential problems with generic ocular meds. Packaging differences, they're strictly regulated for the brand, but not so much for the generic. So bottle material can be different, configuration of the dropper. So you get differences in drop size and differences in efficacy and adverse effects for sure. So even something as simple as allergy or, beta blockers with potential systemic absorption and, friable asthma or other bronchospastic disease, not to mention efficacy. And particular, with the IOP medications. It all has to do, as Greg goes to the next slide, it all has to do with kind of the therapeutic window. And you're relying on the therapeutic window, which is just blood levels between, yay, it's working, and we might have side effects. That should be identical between a brand and generic medication. And with systemic meds, it generally is. It's with the eye drops that, we have a big problem. And even skin topical medications, we have issues. So this nano dropper technology is now available, which you probably saw or have seen. And I love it. I actually just got my sample of nano dropper within the last couple of months. And I have some patients at the pharmacy where I am in clinic where I'm going to, actually have them use the nano dropper simply because they overuse their medications. They can't feel it. Some can get put in the fridge, so that you feel it better, and they just can't manage not overusing the medication. So this is a good idea, for that potential problem.
I see these ladies at, quite a few conferences, and I kind of pick on them a little bit on the name nano, because as you have in this slide back here, it's microliters, right?
Yeah.
And, they call it a nano dropper. Well, take a micron another 1,000 times and cut it up. That's a nano, but I like it. I get that they're showing that it's small, but it does become confusing because there is nanotechnology out there that is used, like Lotamax, SM, submicron is using nanotechnology that's out there. So it gets a little confusing that's out there, but I do like it. And I'll just tell a real quick story. I ducked down to Disney for 2 days. Let's see, Thursday, Friday, flew back yesterday night, and, I was working with a whole bunch of conjunctivitis, and I got a little bit of a red eye and had some Xylit in the as a sample, and it's 1 milliliter. And I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? So I had a nano dropper, because of that I was able to take those 20 drops that are in there and literally help me out in that traveling, and can help me control this, this red eye that I had. So it was pretty cool. With that being said, the MIBO is out by B&L. It was approved in August of this year. And I thought it was really cool what they did. They already took the drop size of the MIBO down to 11 microliters. And so, they don't really have to put a nano dropper on this. It's already been taken down. And the reason, the rationale of this technology is that's why when you put a drop in the eye, a lot of times it runs out because the eye can really only hold around that, whatever it is when you talk to the nano dropper people, that 10 to 12 microliters. And so B&L has already taken this drop size down to 11 microliters. So I thought that was pretty cool. Any comments, Trace, before I move on?
Nope.
Okay. So here, you want to talk a little bit more about generics?
Yeah, so this, just real quick, the generic drug user free amendment is something that is going on where the FDA is looking through research programs. They're establishing a research program through with outside sources that will essentially look at specific types of drug delivery and some other subjects to see where there might be problems and come up with a solution. So they're paying particular interest to drugs that have, as you can see on the bottom, complex active ingredients, formulations, or dosage forms. And that certainly would fit ocular meds, complex routes of delivery, ocular meds, complex drug delivery combinations, drug device combination products, and tools and methodologies for bioequivalence and therapeutic equivalence evaluation. So in particular, they're hitting the ocular meds in terms of the suspensions, the emulsions, the gels, etc. So that's a home run in terms of finally the FDA realizing, I think they've realized it, but taking some responsibility for coming up with a solution. So I think, the wheels of government move slowly. So who knows when we'll see this, but it's going to be great. So brand versus generic from a pharmacist perspective. And I get this question a lot from patients, my optometrist wrote for Maxitrol and, why did you give me generic? Or, Lumigan, certain formulations of Lumigan are now generic as well, as you know. So why did you give me generic? Well, in all 50 states, it is allowable. It's not really a law issue or, doing something unlawful, but in all 50 states, pharmacists are able to automatically substitute generic for brand when available, unless, the prescriber or the patient says, no, I don't want a generic formulation. I only want the brand. So, the patient can indicate that, you can indicate that, but it does create a set of problems, as you already know, because most insurance companies greatly encourage, if not full out mandate, that patients use generic medications. Occasionally you'll have a situation, Restasis is a perfect example, where, the cyclosporin emulsion came out as generic for Restasis, and many, if not most, drug coverage companies, drug insurance plans were mandating that patients only use brand. So, we see that more and more, but the copays are higher for the brand names. Prior authorizations are getting worse and worse and worse. But 80 to 85% less cost for the generic name as compared to their brand name parents. I can kind of see why insurers are doing this. And let's face it, insurers are not around to make us live better and longer. So there's that component as well. Anything to add, Greg?
Nope, all perfect. Thank you. I think this is the last branded versus generic before we shift gears here.
Yeah, and I said most of this, it's just, again, kind of hitting the comments about how things are supposed to be, from a standard deviation of the active ingredients, they have to be within certain standard deviations. Sometimes the generic companies is a little wider. But again, bottle material differences, there's a lot that goes into it. The fact of the matter is, and the end point really is, that you cannot say that all ocular generics are exactly the same as their branded counterparts, and that's problematic.
Yeah, and I think, again, just to echo, I think I see this more on the glaucoma side when things go generic, is where now it's like, oh, I had you controlled. Let's see where the roller coaster begins now.
And it's because there's a more narrow, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's good.
That's because there's a more, narrow therapeutic range between yes, it's working and no, it's not. Whereas if it's something that's, an anti-inflammatory or like you said, an antibiotic for the eye, that has a lot more leeway than a glaucoma med.
Perfect. So that's,
So just,
that's good for the generics and brand. I just kind of wanted, we had that conversation at dinner one time, and I just thought it would be a good one for a good topic here.
yeah.
How about, tips and pearls and writing like glaucoma medications? It's like these patients come in, send it to the pharmacist. And I guess we should point out that you have your own little apothecary that you, even though you teach, you still see, I guess see patients, if you want to say, and, and prescribe for them how many days a week that is, if you want to tell people. But, like you're in your apothecary, do I send you 60 versus 90 for a glaucoma medication? Can I put a date on it, or does it have to have so many refills? So tell me, just give me thoughts on that.
Yeah, I always say you should use refills to sort of control when you want to see the patient again. So if you are starting somebody on a new glaucoma medication and you want to see them again, in the next month, then don't give them anything more than a 30-day supply. So that helps the situation, because if you give a patient, 1 month, a 30-day supply plus 11 refills to make a year, many times a good chunk of those patients you're not going to see, when you exactly want to see them. And I guess that's maybe human nature. I don't know. But in terms of 30-day versus 90-day, there's really no downside as long as you're okay with the patient having 3 months plus, maybe some refills. There's no downside to writing for a 90-day supply if you're okay with the patient having that. Because when the patient then comes to see the pharmacist, we'll run the prescription or adjudicate the prescription for a 90-day supply. And if the insurance will pay for it, great. If insurance does not pay for it for a variety of reasons, some of it they want them to go mail order, some of it is, I'm an independent pharmacy and they want the patient to go to CVS, so they're going to penalize them. If they are coming to our apothecary, they're only going to pay for a 1 month supply, or you can go to CVS and they'll pay for the 90 days. But if you do write for 90 days and insurance denies that, then the only thing that we do is change it to a 30-day supply, but they don't lose any of those refills. So if it was a 90-day supply plus 3 additional refills, that's a year's worth of medication. It would just change to a 30-day supply with 11 refills. They don't lose any of the refills associated with that. And again, some of them is, it's a mail order issue, and that's becoming more and more mandatory through pharmacies, and it does save the patients money for sure.
And then what about, date? Am I able to put a date like,
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
I'm seeing a patient, fill this through, December 10th of 2024?
Yeah, so with electronic prescribing, the date's automatically on there, which is nice. But again, if you are handwriting prescriptions, it's important to put the date on there, because I've had patients come in with hard prescriptions, handwritten prescriptions that, look like the paper was printed right after the Second World War, and there's blood stains, coffee stains, ripped, and they're like, no, I just got it, I promise, which I guess is potentially possible. But, the date is important, because otherwise a patient can fill a prescription technically from any point in their existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not, I guess what I want to say is, like, if a patient, instead of putting a refill on it, can I just tell them 1 year, or it expires in 12/10/24?
Yeah, so if it'll just be a day less. So yeah, if you put today's date, or let's say there's no date on it and the patient fills it today, then it will expire exactly as you said. Actually, it'll be 12/9 of next year, 2024,
Perfect.
for non-controls. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tracy, there's a question that came in, and this has boggled me as well. Is a 90-day supply always 3 bottles, or does it differ with each drop?
It sort of differs with each drop and the metric quantity that it is supplied in. So we figure out actually per drop, literally per drop, 20 drops per ml, that type of thing. We have to figure that out on our end down to the last drop. So if you write for a 10 ml bottle and it's a 74-day supply, we will actually fill for the 74-day supply unless you specifically write on there, fill for 90-day supply, something like that. Insurance companies are getting pickier and pickier. And actually, we have been told by one insurer that if a patient gets their 90-day supply or their 30-day supply of their ocular medication, even 1 or 2 days earlier than they're supposed to, then they'll come back and take the money. Now, here's the weird part. The insurance lets it go through. So in other words, let's say a patient has a 90-day supply of something. Technically, they can get it filled 2 weeks before the end of that 90-day supply. Insurance is saying, no, you have to wait until actually they're 5 days away from that 90-day supply being done. Even though if they came in to the pharmacy at 2 weeks prior to that 90-day being done, the insurance would pay for it. And they're telling us that it doesn't matter. They'll still come back and take all the money from us. So it's always 20 drops per 1 ml for solutions now. And now many of the insurance companies are making us use 15 drops per ml for solutions, emulsions, gels, etc. Whereas we always used 20 drops, or 12 rather, prior to that. So in other words, the medicine has to go longer, last longer for both solutions, suspensions, etc.
And the good news is by
has
Joe.
always been my challenge has been the generic COSAP, my Timlol. I think it only comes in a 10 ml bottle. That's more than 30 days, and it's less than 90 days. So usually I put down 20 mLs.
Yeah, and
Does that work?
It does. I mean, as long as you put 20 mLs, you can even put a note that says something like, 90-day supply. And just by you writing 90-day supply, even if you're at 20 mLs, we'll get as close to that as we can. But we are locked in with certain things, just like you mentioned. If things are only coming in a 10 ml bottle, then probably not going to get to a 90-day supply.
And the good news is that they overfill, but then, some of the bad news is, I have with glaucoma drops, it happens all the time. Patients with the generic like latanoprost, they're good drop takers. They're having their husband or wife put it in and they're running out, and it goes down to that drop size is not the same. And even though they're overfilled, they run out. And then you run into these challenges of, what Tracy just said about refilling it early. So, and the drawback is they don't sample these anymore. So it's kind of like we get stuck. So is the patient goes 7 days sometimes without drops.
Yeah, and I will mention for something like latanoprost, just as a real quick side comment, the big chains cannot negotiate. So if a patient, runs out of their latanoprost and they don't have, 7 days, 7 days are going to have to wait until the refill is going to go through. If the patient actually goes to a Costco, maybe Sam's Club, but I know for sure Costco or even an independent anywhere, they can negotiate price. So, I mean, I don't even think I pay more than $1 for a generic latanoprost to get it in the door of my pharmacy. So the nice part is I can actually say to the patient, I'll charge the patient $12.99 or something like that. And they can buy a bottle as long as they have a refill. And then just get the refill whenever the insurance will pay for it again. So just something to consider, that type of situation does exist, that, an independent or Costco can negotiate price.
And that was pretty timely because, Peter said, what do you do for a patient that misses their eye target or runs out of drops a little early? I think that was a really timely tip. And we got a nice little compliment on that. So, yep, that was why we do this. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, how about the dreaded prior authorization, Trace? Is it as much as a pain in the butt on your end as it is on our end, or how's that all work?
Well, it's, a lot of pharmacies don't do it anymore. A lot of the chain pharmacies will just tell the patient it's not covered, and they won't even mention prior authorization. They won't initiate it. We do, as an independent, we certainly do it. Is it fun? No. And many times patients don't understand what a prior authorization is, and they think it's, something that we've done. But the fact of the matter is more and more meds require prior authorization, and more meds require step therapy, in order for a prior authorization to go through. So, if you want something, one of the new, even, Rocklatan, type medications for for glaucoma, patient's going to have to go through, a few 2 to 3 different other different meds for glaucoma before an insurance company will pay for the Rocklatan, which does, it doesn't not make sense. I mean, on some level, it kind of does make sense, but these are inevitable. And the way it usually works now with Cover My Meds, they're the biggest prior authorization company out there, and they have streamlined it. So if I get a script from you for a patient for Mr. Smith, and it's not going to be paid outright, and it says prior authorization, then I will initiate that through Cover My Meds, who will send it to you, the eye physician, and this will also then go to their insurance company. And then the insurance company either decides in 2 hours or 2 months or 6 months, whatever the case may be, and you have a hard time speeding them up. And then you as the practitioner will actually find out before anybody. However, we sometimes will find out sooner just because we can recheck, send it again through the system to the insurance and see if it's gone through. So they are an inevitable part of patient care, unfortunately. And sometimes it does require a little work on your end to call and explain things or do peer-to-peer or that type of thing. So hopefully people aren't getting too frustrated with these, but it's just one more hoop to jump through.
Prior authorization fatigue, right? So,
Yep.
How about this? The other day, I think I was telling you that you had a patient come in, and it was something that I thought, when I prescribed to the patient, I'm like, oh, I'm used to like Maxitrol, the generic side of it being, anywhere from 15, 10, sometimes it's covered, whatever. And I don't know, it popped up to be something crazy, and it was like 60 or 70 bucks. And so I just went to GoodRx for the patient, typed it in, a whole bunch came down. It was all over the place with numbers, 30, 40, whatever. There was one in there maybe for 15. So I just printed the coupon out and said, here, you have to go to Giant Eagle. You can't really go to your pharmacy. They're like, hey, that's fine. It's on the way to my house. So I sent the prescription over there. Thoughts on, these GoodRxs, how they work, just I get that question sometimes. I thought I would just pass it on to you.
Yeah. So, this is a way for patients to save a lot of money, particularly on generic medications. You don't always get really good prices on brands for sure. But this would be used in lieu of insurance. It wouldn't be used in addition to insurance. So it's not something that is going to take the copay down, where a patient can, quote unquote, double dip and use their insurance as well. So it's one or the other. But, again, for some of the big box stores like Walmart, et cetera, patients can get a lot of their inexpensive generic systemic and ocular meds for, a few bucks a month, which is pretty darn good. And, that they make their money by just doing sheer volume in terms of number of patients. So yeah, patients can get some pretty good prices for the GoodRx coupons, but not all places will accept them. It's usually the big companies, the chains, and some of the grocery store type places.
Yeah, that's what I found. It's definitely not, besides you, I've got a little local pharmacy right down the road from me. He's amazing. And he always keeps a few things in stock for me because it's, in case we need it. And one is, atropine and Zirgan, certain medications that are out there that just not everyone keeps, and you need them that day and not, 24 to 36 hours. But, it's always seems to, like you said, to be the big boys on this GoodRx thing.
Well, and they can afford it just because, as an independent for many years, 33 years, I guess I've been there. We sometimes are losing money to fill a prescription. So, whereas a big chain, it doesn't even impact them. But I mean, there are days where I'm like, oh, I made 7 cents on that one, or oh wow, I really got good on that one. I made 16 cents, and you've spent 15 minutes on something. Let's see, there's a question that popped up. Any tips for lower cost? Oh, I just lost it. I didn't see the rest of it.
For I use just came out. I don't know of any tips or costs savings. I think it's $60, I believe, Peter, with the coupon code. It's a prostate. It's a it's a prostaglandin free. It's a prostaglandin that is preservative free, is what I'm trying to say here. It just came out, single doses. Taya brought it out. The reps were just in the other day. I don't know of any other tips for lowering. Joe, do you have any tips out there?
Well, this is probably a very good medicine that's gonna have a hard time finding its way. I mean, in Europe, they're all doing preservative free, so this would do well there. Here, the additional cost versus the $20 for generic. I hate to say it, but if they don't make it accessible, unfortunately, IU's is going to become known as nobody user.
Right. So, and yeah, that's, and like you said, in Europe, it's definitely used, all the preservative free. They understand the ocular surface. And this year at the OGS, the Optometric Glaucoma Society meeting, it's held a couple times throughout the year for the audience, but Joe was one of the founding members of that, and we pretty much attend every year. And this was the first year that they really hit hard the ocular surface and preservative free, and maybe doing MIGS and SLT, and they were talking supplements so they're kind of getting sensitive to the front of the eye with this. So that'd be hopefully that carries over, that we can get some of these covered that's out there. Tracy, did you see the one that was said? I had a patient that was denied peer-to-peer.
Yes. And unfortunately, there is the only remedy for that, Emily, is probably for the patient or whomever is the one who holds the insurance, they can talk to their benefits manager in the company. And I literally just had this exact same scenario within the past week for a diabetes medication that was the exact same price as the one that it was a biologic, but it was the exact same price as the one that the insurance company paid for. And the patient was so sick on that particular medication. So I made the call to their insurance, and the insurance company said, nope, it's denied. It's not covered by the plan at all. And I said, okay, well then let's get the physician who wrote it to do a peer-to-peer. And they said, nope, that it's not available in their particular plan. So again, the only thing that a patient can do at that point is go to their benefits manager. So if it's through their employer, then the patient can do that. If it's through a spouse or a partner, then they have to do it. It's disgusting, but that's unfortunately the only thing you can do.
Perfect. How about like Imprimis RX or Imprimis? I'm never sure really how to say it. And you kind of have these compounding pharmacies that are out there, and they're putting 12, I shouldn't say 12, but four medications in a bottle. Thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Imprimis RX is great, and it's a compliance or an adherence enhancer for sure. If you have a patient that's using 2 or 3 or 4 medications, whether they're topical, ocular, or systemic, if you can combine them, it is a game changer in terms of a boon to adherence for sure. Imprimis is a well-respected company. The FDA is always chasing them because that's the drug thuggery that is, some of the pharmaceutical companies where they think it's direct competition when companies are compounding medications. And the number of restrictions and laws and guidelines and whatnot that compounding pharmacists and pharmacies have to go through is enormous, and every year it gets worse. And I'm not trying to make it sound like it shouldn't be that way. I'm just saying it should be that way from an efficacy and safety product perspective, not from a competitive, the pharmaceutical manufacturers are getting mad. So hopefully we'll see more of these, but my gut is telling me we're going to see fewer and fewer. As a compounding pharmacist, it's getting very difficult out there for sure.
Yeah, I see a lot of the cataract docs. They'll put in the same bottle, use this company to, maybe they're doing a little subtenons injection of the steroid, but they still want to cover it, with topical and getting it down to once a day. And I know my surgeon will do a PGB, I guess is prednisolone, Gatafloxacin and Ben something Fanac. What's the NSAID?
Bromfenac?
What is
Bromfenac,
it?
Bromfenac.
Bromfenac.
Yeah, that's it. Bromfenac, all in the same bottle, and it does. I mean, it makes it easy, right? They're not putting one drop in, another drop in, another drop in to 3 bottles. It's just one bottle, and they do it once a day. So it does kind of make things a little nicer. So
If you, as you advance the slide, if you guys have heard any of the stories that have been in the news about the some pharmacies manufacturing and some spas manufacturing or compounding rather, like a Wegovy or Ozempic or even Mounjaro, and FDA pulled a bunch of them and assayed them, and some of them were, you know, way below what was described on the label or way above. You know, places like that don't do any favors for compounding pharmacies and places like Imprimis. So you hear a lot of bad stuff out there as well. I feel like you can't win sometimes, but we'll see.
like I mentioned the other with the IUSA and I don't know the different companies that are out there. If it's not Medicare, Medicaid, it's commercial insurance, you could use these. Any tips on we have to activate the card, put the refills, like what's any tips on that from your end whenever we get these kind of commercially pay no more or pay up to $60 or $30 that we get?
Well, I don't know if you guys get the same thing we get as pharmacists and at the pharmacy. I would imagine you do, but lots of times you'll get, some discount cards, and then you'll get some, I don't know, a few pages of, hey, read this when you have free time associated with the card. So that's kind of the fine print. Most of the time, patients have to have a new card every 6 to 12 months, to get the discount, and they do expire. The whole point of a coupon card is usually to make a brand name more affordable, so people start using it. And then, once it's really caught on, the coupon cards disappear, or certainly once it's generic as well, but that usually happens later. And so then you have a situation where a patient is doing really well on a medication that now becomes cost prohibitive and an insurance company doesn't pay for it. So there's always a downside to some of this. It's different than a GoodRx coupon card or anything like that. But these are for brand name only. And again, it's hard to know what a copay is going to be once the coupon expires.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Direct pharmacies that are out there. There's 2. I'm not sure how we haven't really got to put together our update on 2024 lecture yet, but this year, MIBO, the perfluorohexyoctane ophthalmic solution came out, XDEMVY for Demodex, and they're using a couple different pharmacies, but the biggest one that they started off was BlinkRx. It's in Idaho and prescribing out, and there was for RVL did this when they did UpNeek, they were using the New Jersey pharmacy, so on and so forth. They use these specialty pharmacies because I guess they kind of maybe start working with the prior authorizations and things. Any comments on that are out there? The 2 new ones, like I said, are big ones this year are MIBO and XDEMVY.
Yeah, the direct pay pharmacies are springing up for a lot of different products. I mean, even brand name Synthroid, which has been around forever, you're able to get through a direct pay pharmacy now. 90-day supply for $75. That's a darn good deal. It doesn't help people who own pharmacies, or it doesn't help a chain pharmacy or an independent pharmacy, but it certainly helps patients. So I mention it, when things scripts come in and patients have high copays or it's not covered at all. The direct pay pharmacies are great.
A lot of this stuff, again, kind of parallels or what happens within optometry too, right? So you have people buying contacts online, you got people buying glasses online, so on and so forth. So that's why Trace and sit around, I always say, is this good for the independent? Is this bad? Is this good? So that's where a lot of these questions come from that's out there. So,
yeah.
All right, let's do polling question number 2. I'm just curious. I think this is multiple, so you can do MIBO, you can do check both XDEMVY or neither. I'm just curious. Have you prescribed these 2 medications? It looks like we're all caught up on the on the polls or on the questions. No one's texted a question yet, so that's good. So I have prescribed Mibo or Xdemvy. Donald, you're okay with missing the first one. You can just do the next few polls. You're good. All right, so we're getting to that nice high number there. So I'm just gonna end the poll. You're welcome. And I'll share the results. So 2 new meds, and we have 15% that have done Mibo. We got 11% that have done Xdemvy, and we've got 80% that haven't done either one of those yet. All right, so let me just show you something about Xdemvy here. And then the reason I put this in is that, boy, it's a prior auth. Medicare, Medicaid. I've got some through, this is the only medication that is FDA approved for Demodex that's out there. The commercials are always kind of the easier ones, still with prior auth. I kind of have been doing the prior auth for Xdemvy and for Mibo just to kind of see the process. But I really think this is going to be a pretty cool medication here. Here's a patient. You can see the collarettes. Joe knows my favorite thing. This one's a little blurry over here. This is time 0. My favorite thing is the mite lives up in the lash. This is literally Demodex poop. It excretes, it builds up. And then that's why, the eyelid gets irritated. A lot of time it's itchy. And a lot of times when the patients come back in, this is just 3 weeks later down here, being on the drop. The drop is one drop twice a day. Both eyes usually have the mites, but it could be one eye, but it's for 6 weeks. I usually tell them until empty. So it's, I forget the size bottle that's on it. I think it's like a 7-something bottle. I forget the exact size of it. But this is what's nice. Look how this cleaned this up in just 3 weeks. I didn't stop them on it. I kept them on it. This one's a little blurry, but you can see I got a little better picture on the 3-week follow-up. But again, it's a prior auth that's out there. That needs to be done. But Trace, have you had anyone prescribing Xdemvy? Any tips or anything out there that you're aware of?
I don't think we can dispense it. I mean, I think I had a prescription for one, but is Xdemvy?
Yeah, you are correct. I just talked about it. It's the specialty pharmacies. You are correct. Yeah.
But doesn't mean we don't get them. We get prescriptions for the for the direct pay all the time.
What's the easiest way to differentiate between blepharitis and Demodex under the slit lamp? What I can tell you with Demodex is that you can see this kind of how it attaches, and it's got this kind of candle wax all the way up. Like this one here is very classic. This one's very classic. I don't pull a lash and use a microscope and so on and so forth that's out there. So if it's got this kind of collarette appearance, then it's attached all the way back, kind of like it's coming out of the lash or coming out of where the lash is, the orifice is. It's usually Demodex. But Joe, do you have any comments on, I see the how to differentiate under the slit lamp?
Okay, I agree with what you said. There's been enough information from people who have flat lashes, twirled lashes, and look under with a microscope to convince me that when I see those collarettes that are greasy and right at the base, I know that I'm dealing with Demodex.
Okay, perfect. Says new grad here. For these 2 new drugs, are there certain pharmacies? Sorry, someone just asked another one and it moved. That cover these more than others? What are the insurance coverage going to be since they are newer? So for Madison, yes. For these 2 medications, Blink RX was who they recommended. And that was, I think, back here. But what I've been doing is for XDemvy, because BlinkRx got hit with 2 new medications and they got overwhelmed. So with my best advice would be talk to the local rep, find out who your local rep is. And my local rep came in and told me to use CVS Pharmacy, which is in Monroeville, which is a specialty pharmacy. And I'm located in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it because it's Pennsylvania to Pennsylvania, but use the specialty pharmacies. These are 2 medications. Your sales reps are constantly getting on weekly calls. Probably my best advice would be to find out who the local rep is and just ask them, because they're getting updated on weekly on which is the easiest path for us to prescribe these medications. So, all right. So where were we here? So what other questions are rolling in here, Joe, as I get back to, I guess what I'll do is I'll launch this poll and then we'll do some questions.
I think you're actually caught up for all the questions. Just a few technical issues going on for some people. No worries.
Are there expectations for direct pay pharmacies and pharmaceuticals to become more prevalent? Trace, that's for you.
I mean, I would say maybe, it is kind of a conundrum for a pharmaceutical company when you think about it, because most direct pay pharmacies have a flat rate for a product, not necessarily. I mean, the trend has been that direct pay pharmacies are not billing insurance. So if you have a pharmaceutical that's coming out, a new brand or trade name, it behooves a pharmaceutical company to put it everywhere rather than in a direct pay pharmacy. But to the second part of your question, most of them are web-based, and it's tough for older patients. That's an issue for sure. Some of them will send texts or call patients, but yeah, that's going to get worse and worse. I wish I could tell you it would be better, but I think more products will come through the direct pay.
Okay, so I'm going to end the poll here, share the results. And, the question is, this is, we're going to turn this into maybe a challenge or maybe more of a controversy that's out here for the lecture. When prescribing a supplement for macular degeneration, what level of zinc do you recommend? No zinc, 25 to 40, 80, because that's what's in AREDS 2, or you don't know. All right, so let's jump into where the controversy is. So this goes back to genetic testing, is that, when you look at genetic testing, we're looking at the ARMS, we're looking at complement factor H, and we're looking at C3 here, at least in this genetic test by Visible Genomics here. This is one I use in the office, and it basically tells the patient high, low, or moderate. This might be before they come up, and it's based on these genetic SNPs. And you can see ARMS, it talks about low risk and moderate risk. And then there's a bunch of complement factor H's here, and high risk and low risk, and then complement factor 3. I'm not going to touch on in this lecture, but the complement factor is pretty important here in macular degeneration, because that's your 2 new medications. Apellis is a C3 inhibitor. You have Iveric, which is your C5 inhibitor that's out there. So you have complement factor H. It's down in the RPE. That's what I always want to press upon. Macular degeneration is a Brooks membrane RPE. You can see the genetic SNPs here. Complement factor H. Here's your C3A. Here's your C5. Again, Iveric going after the 5. You got Apellis going after the 3. And remember, the complement factor is part of our immune system. We got our adaptive immune system, which is the B cells and T cells. You got your innate immune system. And then you have your complement factor, that membrane attack complex, that MAC. And so we're down here with your C5s creating your C3s, and that's the smoking, the exercise, the obesity, blah, 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 that can trigger these genetic SNPs that are found that we just talked about here in the genetics, which are found down here in the RPE. So, what is the basis of zinc that's out there? Again, it talks about AREDS 80 milligrams, but I think I have it highlighted here. It got moved a little bit, but it says, there's really, the investigators did not find a difference between 80 milligrams and 25. So why are we, talking about this here? Is that when it comes down to understanding the genetics, this is the controversy now, right? This is one side saying this, the other side is saying that, is that it says right here that treatment response to antioxidant zinc-based complement factor in arms 2. Now I'm going to kind of interpret what all this says right here. It says in a genetic test that if you don't have an arms that's high risk, so you have low risk, but you have 2 complement factor H's that are high risk, 80 milligrams can promote a choroidal neovascular membrane. That's what it's saying here in these studies, is that when you have no arms, that's low risk, you can read through here, and you have 2 complement factor H's, that you basically can promote a choroidal neovascular membrane. And there's all kinds of literature out there that you can read about. It's been around since 2015. Jerry Sherman lectures on this topic. I've heard him talk about it. I heard him talk about lawsuits where someone was wet in one eye. Someone found these articles. They never changed them and they lost a lawsuit over it, so on and so forth. But then you have the American Academy of Ophthalmology that says, well, they don't really have a predictive response that's out there. But then the people that know a lot about this and know the people that were in the original AREDs, they were kind of the same people that were on this paper right here. So that's the controversy, right? If someone has, if you're not genetically testing, you might be promoting choroidal neovascular membrane. So I had a patient come into my office because I do genetic testing. I asked them if they want to have it done, if they want to know. And here's what happened right here. Low risk. This one down here in your complement factor H, high risk. This one here is low risk. This one's high risk. This is exactly what the paper was talking about. So with that being said, would you now prescribe, knowing this, would you prescribe AREDS to 80 milligrams? That's the controversy that's out there. Trace, as this poll's coming in, do you have any thoughts on, here, we're not even talking drugs. We're talking like, over-the-counter supplements here.
Yeah. The more I learned about this since I've been teaching at PCO, the more I've realized that it doesn't make sense to me why it's recommended in a lot of places, just AREDS 2 across the board. There's literally no downside to just recommending appropriate antioxidant protection, comprehensive, or if people prefer the lutein zeaxanthin and maybe the mesozeaxanthin, but with a low zinc, less than 40 milligrams.
Yeah. So the key is that when I talk about this, I'm not saying you have to go no zinc. The key is, and the people that are out there, and I'm starting to see a consensus when I go to lectures now, is that it doesn't have to be no zinc. It's just low zinc. So anywhere from 25 to 40 milligrams a day, because they're putting zinc in a lot of things. There's zinc in bread, there's zinc in cereal. So and you get it just through the natural diet too. So I'm a big low zinc, not no zinc, that's out there. So I like to do nothing more than 40 milligrams that's out there. And the studies have shown 25 is just as beneficial as 80. So we can see here we have,
Pretty impressive.
about 70, 80. What's that?
I said pretty impressive results.
Yeah, 78%. And we still have a few people, Cavalier, that are going to do prescribe that. So. Alrighty. So again, always a reminder that AREDS 2 is for people with intermediate or late stage. That's out there. Remember, this is from I just always tell my patients to type NEI FAQ, frequently asked questions, FAQ, NEI AREDS 2, and that's where I just screenshot a lot of these from out there. And what I like pointing out, and I didn't make this a poll question, but I know the answer from whenever I do it live or whenever I do other webinars, is that, can I take a multivitamin if I'm taking AREDS 2? And most people think that they washed out doing the AREDS study, but right here it said during the AREDS 2 study, almost 9 out of 10 participants took multivitamins. So 90% of your people in the AREDS 2 were taking a multivitamin. So when patients come in and they have drusen, intermediate or advanced, I definitely make sure they're on a low dose zinc. You could do high dose if you want. I'm just showing you the controversies that are out there, but I do a low dose zinc AREDS 2, but I also do a nice little comprehensive formula that's out there covering A to Z and so on and so forth. So, but the challenge and the controversies today were the zinc versus the high zinc versus low zinc. And then the other challenge or controversy that's out there is to remind everyone, if you just go to the frequently asked questions, 9 out of 10 participants were taking a multivitamin. All right. So let's jump to polling question number 5 here. My preferred oral antibiotic for hordeolum or STI is, there's no wrong answer because we're not talking allergies. I just kind of want to see where everyone lands on this. Is it Augmentin? Is it a Z-Pak? Is it Keflex, Bactrim, or Cipro? Any comments popping into your head there, Tracy, as we're waiting for this to roll in?
No, I'm waiting to see what people decide here.
All right, you can't see it, but I can. Let's see. I'm going to share it. I'm going to end it and share it. Here you go.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by I thought vitamin Z, the Z-Pak would be the #1 go-to there, but we've got Augmentin that's out there. There's no really wrong answer here. I think they all would work. I think they have some adverse drug effects and so on and so forth. Tracy and I have been doing an oral antibiotic lecture for years, and it keeps getting tweaked as things unfold. But this was our paradigm. It was penicillin. If you're going to do a penicillin-based Augmentin, if you're going to do a macrolide, like a Z-Pak, Keflex, if it was a cephalosporin, and then quinolone was Cipro and Bactrim. But as we were starting to give more quinolones out, and Tracy's more eloquent to talk about this, we started seeing all these adverse drug effects with fluoroquinolones. So Tracy, you want to talk about that? And then we shifted fluoroquinolones to the 5th place.
Yeah, so fluoroquinolones are great drugs. You know, when they came out, they were game changers in terms of having newer agents to give us better coverage for some hard to treat resistant organisms, for sure. But what we quickly learned as an extension of the reason why fluoroquinolones shouldn't be used in kids less than 16, 17, 18, depending upon where you read, and that was specifically because it could cause arthropathy and cartilage damage. So we knew right out of the gate, before these drugs were even approved, that was a problem. And then we started to see extensions of this issue, with all different types of connective tissue. So even something like retinal detachment, there's a question as to whether or not these agents can cause that. Some people say no, some people say maybe, a few people say yes. But Greg can speak to why that would even be an issue, and it certainly has to do with the collagen and connective tissue. This has been looked at, and there's even a black box warning now on all fluoroquinolones that basically says, which is relatively new. So, remember, the black box warning is basically the FDA's highest level of, you better decide you really want to use this. Read the problems that might occur before you recommend it or write a prescription for it. And even something like aortic aneurysm. That was something I read the other day. It's being evaluated, which makes sense. It's connective tissue issues. Tendinitis, ripping an Achilles tendon, etc. They're all different types of things. But look what else is here. Other than tendon rupture and QT prolongation, which is an arrhythmia, photosensitivity, we even have things like peripheral paresthesias. So I actually had an optometrist years ago who said his wife, they had gone on vacation and his wife had gotten bronchitis. It was bacterial bronchitis, was prescribed a fluoroquinolone, levofloxacin. And within 2 weeks, she started to get unilateral peripheral paresthesias, and it never went away. And the problem with all of this is that the fluoroquinolone adverse drug reactions can occur acutely, but they can also occur weeks to months after the drug has been discontinued. So how the heck do you find a temporal relationship there? But they do exist.
So with those, fluoroquinolone reactions that occurred as we started giving them to more and more people, that ended up putting the quinolones down there into the kind of that fifth position. And someone asked in the questions, why didn't we put doxy in here? We'll talk about doxy here in a second. You can use doxy for an infection. You would just have to give it at 100 milligrams once or twice a day. Low doses for the kind of the meibomian gland. So we have, penicillin, imacrolide, cephalosporins here, sulfa. This is what has changed in 2020, and it hasn't really changed since. But I just want to kind of animate this whole slide, and we won't turn it into an oral antibiotic. This is kind of challenges that are out there. And this is what I love about amoxicillin and potassium clavuronate. The potassium clavuronate neutralizes the beta-lactamase. It's good for pregnancy. It's good for gram-positive, gram-negative. The only thing I have to worry about is, are they allergic to penicillin? But I think the challenge is, Trace, it comes in all these different, formulations. Which one do you give? 250, 500, 875? How do you do that as an adult comes in?
So before I forget to mention, there's a huge shortage of Augmentin and amoxicillin, not only the kids version, the suspension version, but now even just the pill version. It's just added to the list of things that are hard to get right now. But it is not a weight-based drug per se as it pertains to adults. Kids, we always are dosing kids usually less than 12 milligram per kilogram per dose or milligram per kilogram per day. But in adults, it's a little bit different. We are choosing our dose essentially based upon what we're treating or what we think we're treating. So for the most part, for like a sty, dacryocystitis, even something like that, 500 milligrams twice a day should be sufficient. 875 is usually reserved for, hard to treat, more resistant group A beta hemolytic strep species, that type of thing. So it wouldn't be wrong to use the 875. It just might be a little bit of, sledgehammer on a fruit fly type thing. The 250, we're rarely going to use the 250 milligram dose in adults anymore. When it came out, it was something that we did, but we don't really use it that much. The dose of clavulanate, potassium clavulanate, same thing, does vary. And that's usually what gives people the stomach problems with the Augmentin. It's a great combination for sure. And if you notice at the bottom, before we move on here, it says it covers staph species, strep, and Haemophilus influenza. So mostly some skin, staph and strep, and then H flu, which is our gram negative. So 2 gram positive, 1 gram negative. And essentially when you're looking at, a dacryocystitis or even a sty, that type of thing, you're sort of guessing at whether or not it's going to be a gram positive or a gram negative. Some of it has to do with how much goo is produced. If it's dacryocystitis, if there's a lot of greenish, yellowish goo being produced, it might be more likely to be H flu. And I only mention this because in the poll, we had maybe 17% that said azithromycin or Z-Pak. And then there was a huge majority for Augmentin and Keflex. And both Augmentin and Keflex are going to have slightly better staph strep coverage, but decent H flu. Azithromycin is going to have more H flu coverage and reasonable staph and strep. So, we do have to take some of that into consideration when we're evaluating patients.
I know it's kind of a weird place to do it. I'm going to take care of some of these questions because they're rolling in and they're deep and it's supposed to be live and
Yeah.
interactive,
Mhm.
synchronous. So what are your thoughts on zeaxanthin for macular degeneration? I'm just going to talk about all the macular pigments: lutein, zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin. They're all macular pigments. I'm just going to give you my real quick rundown. I think they're misnamed. They're more foveal pigments. They're found in the layer of Henle. I'm a big pathophysiology. The disease is in the outer retina. Macular pigments are super important for contrast sensitivity and blue light absorption. I always talk about the fovea being the third lens of the eye. Our cornea, our lens, and our fovea is curved and it helps focus the light. I believe that the macular foveal pigments help protect the cones. But then when you get outside into the retina and down into where the disease is, I'm not sure how much protection that we're getting with the macular pigments, lutein, zeaxanthin, and mesozeaxanthin. Some more of a big comprehensive get down there, resveratrol, where the disease is. There's no lutein, mesozeaxanthin, and so zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin, and lutein in the RPE. So that's the thoughts on that. We're going to get to doxy here. Topical fluoroquinolones, you don't have to worry about them, Trace, as we do with the oral fluoroquinolones. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So you'll see them used in, safely in children, even in, some pregnancy as well. Not that it should be your first choice anyhow, but yeah, you don't have the same concerns for sure.
Yep, that's usually what question pops up that, oh my gosh, I used the fluoroquinolone on my 8-year-old and they're totally fine on that. Someone just made a comment.
Oh, Greg, let me just make one comment on that. The reason why that question pops up is because if you look at the package inserts or the physician's desk reference associated with topical ocular fluoroquinolones, the recommendations as well as the contraindications are exactly the same from a topical eye drop as well as the systemic oral agents. And that's an FDA law, rule, whatever you want to call it, that whatever formulation of a fluoroquinolone comes out, even if it's not systemically absorbed, almost at all, you still have to say, oh, it might cause tendinitis. And that's just the way that FDA mandates. So
maybe pharmacogenetics will eventually help us with what I think what Jason just mentioned here. He shifted away from Augmentin while we're on this slide. He had a gentleman who had a weird kidney issue. After some research, this is common with Augmentin. And then we had a patient here. Her mom had cataract extraction and gadafloxacin created a pigment dispersion, which is unfortunate.
I wouldn't get too afraid of the amoxicillin plus clavulanate. It maybe was interstitial nephritis, which is not that common. But every single drug is a toxin for sure, and we should treat them as such. You guys live a good chunk of your life in the topical ocular, which is nice. They're a lot more forgiving, but every single drug has a potential for a downside. They all cause side effects, whether you see them or know about them or not. But I would just, be worried a little bit about completely eliminating Augmentin, because of one patient. It's certainly something to respect for sure.
So for the Z packs here, I think we know it's a penicillin, for drug of choice for penicillin, but we use a lot, and there's a 6-day or a 5-day Z pack, and then there's a 3-day Z pack. It has 6 pills in it, and this has 6 pills in it. Which one is prescribed most, and any comments on that?
So the 3-day one is called a tri-pack, and then of course everybody knows the Z pack. That's the one that we teasingly call it the vitamin Z, because people hand this out like it's the fountain of youth and can cure everything. You have a canker sore in your mouth and Z pack's going to somehow treat it. I've had actually a physician tell me that. But regardless, most of the time the Z-Pack is 6 tablets, as Greg mentioned, 2 on day 1, and then 1 on days 2 through 5. And the nice part about a Z-Pack, even though it's 5 days worth of therapy, it actually stays in the systemic circulation. Well, that's probably a bad way to represent it. It continues killing bacteria It's only 5 days of therapy. It continues to kill bacteria up to 7, 8, maybe even 9 days in some patients. Everybody's a little bit different. And that's usually what you're looking for in the types of infections that you guys will use it in. A tri-pack is 3 days worth of therapy. You'd maybe get 5 days total of antibacterial killing. I don't know that that would be sufficient most of the time.
So stick with the 5 days Z-Pack.
Stick with the 5 days Z-Pack.
Okay. Here we go. Keflex cross reaction, which we're going to talk about allergies coming up here. It seemed to be another one of the big boys that are out there. It's available 250, 500, pretty much prescribed 500 twice a day for a week.
Yeah, probably 500 twice a day. Yeah, we don't use much. Same as with, the amoxicillin. We don't use much 250 milligram in adult patients anymore. It's more of the 500 milligram. I'm not saying you'll never use it. It's just that, we tend to see better results with minimum inhibitory concentrations and stuff with the 500 milligrams.
Great. All right, blow fractures. Okay, now we're talking about the second generation. Down here, we're going to talk about that, why that might be important for allergies if they're allergic to penicillin coming up here. Is there any thoughts on, the second generation? It says better for Haemophilus, maybe give it for children. Yeah, it's category B, so it's safe. Any thoughts on the second generation?
Yeah, I would just say, some of it does go to the allergy concern. If somebody is listed as penicillin allergic, the farther we get, the deeper we get into the generations of cephalosporins, the lower the chance of a cross reaction between the two. And also because cefuroxime has pretty darn good Haemophilus influenza coverage, more so than Cephalex and Keflex. So it's just something else that's available. I see a lot of cefuroxime right now because so many of the amoxicillins and augmentins are just not available.
Sometimes it becomes a supply issue then, huh?
Yep. Safe, great drug.
We have in here limited and last line, but I think that's, has changed. I probably should delete that off of there. And, we come to sulfa drugs. We're going to talk about the sulfur allergy coming up here shortly. There's Bactrim double strength, Bactrim single strength. Is there anything that we need to, which one is prescribed most? I usually do the double strength, but what's the thoughts?
Yeah, you should be using double strength. As a matter of fact, most pharmacies don't even carry the single strength. And the only thing that you might use a single strength for in 2023-24 is maybe for urinary tract infection prophylaxis. So the Bactrim DS is the way to go for most infections.
Right. So you're getting basically double the amount of 400 goes to 800 and 80 goes to 160. So double strength is the way to go if you're going to treat an ocular infection. Remember, it's hard to get medications to the eye and to the eyelids. So sometimes you have to go with the bigger numbers. And we kind of talked about this that's out there. We have Cipro and Levaquin, all the adverse events. They're great medications, but they do have these risks that go along with it. We have 500 milligrams twice a day of Cipro. I typically do Cipro, but there's 500 milligrams once a day of Levaquin. Any thoughts on which way to lean, Tracy, or is?
Well, two different coverages. So ciprofloxacin, you're going to get Pseudomonas coverage out of it. That's essentially kind of what we save ciprofloxacin for, what we should be saving ciprofloxacin for, because all of its gram-positive coverage, most of its gram-positive coverage, is gone because of resistance. And then levofloxacin covers both. But the other thing that I would say, levofloxacin will give you, the deeper coverage of Haemophilus influenza, et cetera, and good staph strep coverage, but just not resistant staph strep. The other thing that I would mention, we didn't really see some of these really awful side effects from the fluoroquinolones until we got our levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, gemifloxacin, gadafloxacin, until they came out. So ciprofloxacin and ofloxacin had been around for a long time before the new guys came out, and we started seeing all these really awful side effects or worsening of what we knew was Cipro and ofloxacin. So there's a decent amount of science behind ciprofloxacin, being probably a safer drug compared to levofloxacin. However, they have different coverages, so they're not so much interchangeable from a systemic perspective. The eye, it's a little different.
Yeah, good point. That's always learn something every time we lecture together. So So someone asked about Doxy. Doxy's great. Doxy's great for MRSA. You used it. The person mentioned, why isn't it on the list? We use it a lot for meibomian gland dysfunction. We get a lot of questions out there about hyclate and monohydrate. And to me, I think Tracy's taught me that sometimes it's a supply chain, but is there a difference, Trace, whenever I prescribe hyclate and the pharmacist calls me up and says, hey, can I use monohydrate? Do you want to give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're interchangeable. The dosing is the same. Essentially the absorption is the same. When the two products were out kind of head to head, the manufacturer saying, oh, one is better absorbed, one is less problematic on the gut. But the fact of the matter is all doxycycline is tough on the gut. People should be taking it with food, and whatever one you can get. And depending upon where you live, I mean, we have doxycycline supply issues right now as well. So I tend to be able to get the hyclate, but sometimes it's tablets, sometimes it's capsules. It doesn't really matter. Whichever one you write for, if it's not available, most of the time the pharmacist will just switch it to the other.
And I actually put that in my notes now. I put that, I pick one and I put, whichever is available, hyclate or monohydrate, please feel free to substitute. So, because that saves that phone call. So it's my electronically prescribed. This is a cute little picture here. These are all vodka drinks. And so my whole point is that there's vodka in all these, but vodka can be delivered in many ways, but it's the vodka that most of the people want when they go out for a cocktail. So whether it's, whatever this is, ginger beer and orange juice and these little fun cocktails that are around, but basically it's the doxycycline. And in this case, the hyclate and the monohydrate doesn't matter in this case on how it's delivered. Just a really cute way to try to remember it. All right, let's do polling question number 6. Let's see what we got. Do you recommend a probiotic after prescribing an oral antibiotic? All right, Trace, well, that's rolling in. Let's see. Someone mentioned about treating chlamydia, which 1 gram, and the patient immediately threw up afterwards. What did they miss?
So I did ask how soon after did the patient throw up? I mean, 1 gram is a lot and some people's stomach just can't handle it. If it's within 20 to 30 minutes after, or even a little bit longer after the 1 gram dose. Okay. She said within 30 minutes. So it probably was a chemoreceptor trigger zone issue. Our vomiting center is close to the brainstem, and macrolides are inherently and historically really tough for nausea, vomiting. So it's not an effect right in the gut. It's actually it's a centrally mediated vomiting. So you could consider not giving 1 dose all at once. Patient could do, 250 milligrams, wait a few hours, do another 250, or, if someone says they have a sensitive stomach, you could just spread it out a little. But you didn't really miss anything. It's just that she was particularly sensitive, maybe had a hair trigger, chemoreceptor trigger zone. It's unusual with azithromycin, but very common with erythromycin and clarithromycin. So you can see it with azithromycin. It's just not as common.
There we go, about 50-50, Trace, on the probiotic after an antibiotic. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm always going to say a probiotic is important as long as you get a good probiotic. And there's, so many different choices out there. That's a hard thing to even quantify or qualify a good probiotic. But our gut is our second brain. 85% of our immune system lives in our gut. So many things come from our gut. And we basically have dysfunction with our gut microbiome from the minute we become earthside. So it's important to reset our gut occasionally, and then also while you're taking antibiotics for sure. And if you don't want to do it while you're taking antibiotics, please do it afterwards for some period of time.
So I got a question for you. If I was sitting out at dinner with you and I pretty much do a probiotic about every 3 to 4 months with my travel schedule. I just came off a really crazy travel schedule, not eating well, a couple alcohol drinks, this and that, the academy. So I figure, okay, I'm going to take my probiotic for a month. I do that like 3 or 4 times a year. I think a lot of people think that they have to take it all the time. Do they have to recolonize all the time? Maybe if they're taking maybe a chronic antibiotic, or do they have to recolonize, because now we have these pre and postbiotics? But what about probiotics? Should we take them all the time?
Well, assuming you have a good probiotic that's actually living, in the bottle or, however it comes, assuming it's living and it can do the job it's intended to do, you shouldn't need it all the time and you shouldn't use it all the time. I mean, there's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that you can end up with. You can end up in a bad situation by taking probiotics all the time. I see patients that take probiotics all the time and they're fine. And a lot of that is because they're, probably taking a dead capsule full of bacteria. So a capsule full of dead bacteria. That's the way I should say it. But really, I do about the same. I sometimes don't do a full 30 days. I'll do 14 days, every 2 to 3 months. And, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But then I always say you don't put a lizard in a cage and not feed the lizard. And the lizard is the probiotic. It needs to be tended to in between when you're recolonizing. And that's the most important part. Just look up gut microbiome when you have 5 minutes of free time. And it is linked to so many different things. We know that overuse of antibiotics in kids is linked to obesity in, their teen and adult years. It's not surprising how it's all linked. So yes, we should use a probiotic.
My final comment is, in the reading that I've been trying to find, is that if you treat a, say, a hordeolum, that you can disrupt someone's gut microbiome from 2 weeks to a year. Everyone's an individual. So, I have definitely recommended probiotics for the patients. So,
yeah.
All right, let me stop sharing here. Let me jump back and let's do some antiviral work here that's out there. So antivirals, I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. We have Zovirax, which is acyclovir, good for simplex and zoster, 200, 400, 800, and IV that's out there. It's big pills because it's poor GI absorption. Remember that they get cleared through the kidneys. I'm going to go through these quickly because we don't do much acyclovir. That's category B. We use then these next two, Famvir and Valtrex, off label because they're for genital herpes, and that's okay to do that because there's a lot of papers out there that show that Famvir and valacyclovir work, but no one really uses Famvir. I'll just ask Tracy real quick. Have you seen a prescription for Famvir recently, or do you see it much, Trace?
Actually, I saw one within the past year, and it was just, a new prescriber. They weren't sure what to use. Same with acyclovir. I had this, a couple for acyclovir where a patient was supposed to take something 5 times per day. So neither one of them are really necessary at this point in time.
And then we have the Valtrex, which used to be kind of a pain to get, but then it went generic. So that was good. And then this seems to be the big boy that's out there. Are you able to confirm that?
I am, because it's a better absorbed version of acyclovir. It's acyclovir. It gets broken down or cleaved into acyclovir in the gut. Much better absorption than acyclovir. And even though it can cause some GI upset, it doesn't seem to be the same as even with acyclovir. So taking something 3 times a day is a lot better than 5 times per day, just from an adherence perspective.
I'm going to launch this poll. I think it's one. Nope. Okay. Cleared through the kidneys. Remember that all of these are cleared through the kidneys. So do you recommend, Tracy, that when you see, and I know I do, but do you recommend, and should we be recommending that, we do know from the herpetic eye disease study, number 2, that 400 milligrams twice a day, which is now 500 milligrams once a day, if you're going to use Valtrex, to kind of keep that herpetic lesion from coming back. It reduces the reoccurrence, it reduces it coming back. But should we be recommending kidney functioning tests to the primary care physician?
I would say in older patients, that's something that should be done anyhow. So, everybody gets labs done or should be getting labs done no matter their age, based for your yearly physical. But definitely people who are 65, 70, 75 and up, we have some 80-year-olds that are, young, and some 65-year-olds that seem like they're 90. But, once the actual age-related decrease in renal function occurs, then we should be eyeballing it every once in a while if you're the one prescribing for the chronic usage, for sure.
Perfect. All right, let's do polling question number 7 here. Which oral antiviral is lactose free? Acyclovir, Famvir, Valtrex, they all have lactose, or tell me the suspense is killing me. I know whenever you said about, you can't put a lizard in a cage and not feed it, Joe kind of perked up on that, being a person that has
Speaking his
two
language.
lizards right down the hallway.
Remind me, I gotta throw some bugs in there and feed them. Thank you.
Joe's got a very special ecosystem at his house. So.
And maybe slightly scary.
Not scared if you don't turn your back on anything.
All right, let's end this poll and let's look at that. We've got 64% tell me the suspense is killing me. All right, they all have lactose. Yeah, the 10% there, the 11 out of 113, Valtrex is the one here. And so, well, what's the difference? This is, from the acyclovir. This was the herpetic eye disease study. This was number 1 that was done. And GI upset was the number 1 GI symptom. And they think it was related to the lactose that is found in acyclovir and Famvir. So if you need another reason other than the facts, everything that Tracy just told you about, that Valtrex is the way to go when prescribing for these herpetic, zoster, simplex, chronic, acute, whichever you want to go. I pretty much just migrated over the Valtrex. But Trace, are these low amounts in here enough to create a GI upset with someone if they have lactose intolerance?
Well, yeah, I mean, you either have the enzyme to break down lactose or you don't. And, there, to some extent, there can be an immune mediated reaction associated with it as well. So it doesn't take a lot of lactose to cause somebody to have some pretty significant GI symptoms if they are susceptible to that.
Yeah, we had this conversation, I don't know, about 2 or 3 years ago, and I was doing my herpetic, and I just said, you know what? I like to keep things simple, so Valtrex. So, and it's better absorbed and so on and so forth. So here's another one between acyclovir, another challenge, that's out there, I guess, acyclovir, Famvir, valacyclovir. Given at high dosages, they can create this kind of CNS agitation. And they found that Famvir was the best way to go. But I had a patient come in. She had bilateral cornea transplants from herpetic eye disease, and she transferred up out of Pittsburgh, and she couldn't have been more than 90 pounds wet. And they had her on 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day, and she had this Charles Bonnet-like symptoms. And I pulled this up and showed the daughter that was taking care of mom, and we slowly got her down to 1,000 milligrams, and these like hallucination type of things, seeing, this Charles Bonnet, like, seeing things. She wasn't, reduced like in Charles Bonnet, and we were able to do that. So don't forget, high dosages can create these hallucinations. Have you heard that? I mean, I know you've heard it, but have you seen it, Trace, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've seen it in a couple of patients. Anybody that is on the, older end of the age spectrum, for sure, they are more likely to experience CNS type effects from drugs anyhow. So yeah. How old did you say that patient was?
Oh, she was being taken care of. She's probably 85 if I had to.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's getting up there. So I haven't seen it in anybody 65. Yeah, no, for sure. She's got 85-year-old kidneys, so she's not clearing it as quickly as she should. Her therapeutic concentration was not therapeutic. It was probably supratherapeutic.
Right. That was probably the side effect that we were seeing. We had a question come in, which is cheaper, acyclovir or valacyclovir?
Believe it or not, I think valacyclovir is a little cheaper, at least where I am. Acyclovir tends to be a little bit more expensive. So even if they were, even if valacyclovir was a little bit more expensive, it still makes more sense to give it in an acute scenario, just again, because of that 5 times per day for acyclovir and only 3 times per day to val.
So Todd, I saw your question roll in here, and so this will answer your question. You're asking about, is Valtrex okay, herpetic, instead of Ziragan or Viroptic? And is there a difference between orals? There's plenty of studies that are out there. Do you have the Zirgan here, you have orals, and you have a simplex dendrite here. And there's plenty of articles out there that if you have epithelial keratitis, there's an equivalence out there. And, these studies are, older. And since then, there's been more studies come out. And this was 2010. And they pop out. I guess the only caveat is that, if it's centrally located, sometimes I like to do maybe watch them closely, add that steroid on reversal, an amniotic membrane. When it gets central, it just makes me pitter patter a little bit more. Maybe add the Zirgan, but certainly a lot of us have migrated away from using topicals that for these lesions that are out there. Joe, your thoughts on that? I know you see a lot of that. So
I like to, well, if they can get a topical, that's great. But generally speaking, orals work for me.
okay, great, perfect.
Just trying to help somebody out here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. We're
worries.
always constantly trying to help people in and out and troubleshooting. All right,
And there was
allergy.
just a quick comment, the $480 on GoodRx, somebody looked up the Zirgan price. That's actually pretty good, believe it or not, because that's what it costs me to get in the door, a bottle of Zirgan. So we would charge a little bit more than that, but it is expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other is very toxic. There actually is an acyclovir ointment that's approved. It's just not it's just not manufactured in the U.S. It's I forget the name of it, and we do have it, but nobody actually sells it. That might be a little bit less toxic, but I'm not sure if it's any less expensive. My experience with the orals have worked quite fine.
Perfect. Let's jump through some allergy here. We're getting close to, we're going to get close to that wrapping up here at that 8:50-ish mark. But cross reaction that's out there, we talked about earlier, this 10% cross reaction. And I see this in lectures all the time where, if you're allergic to Bactrim, then, or if you're allergic to the sulfonamide, Celebrex, or Diamox, you're going to be allergic to Bactrim, and so on and so forth. And Tracy and I are going to kind of unravel a little bit here. So here is the reason, again, why there's this 10% cross reaction between Keflex and the first generation is that I'll animate this slide. This is penicillin, this is Keflex and Ceftin. It all goes down to the organic structures. But Trace, you're the pharmacist here. Why don't you bring some life to why here and not down here?
Well, so they're all beta-lactams. So, when there's a similar structure that goes from one drug to the next, there's always going to be a chance of cross-reactivity if somebody is allergic. But the big thing that makes a difference, as Greg was mentioning, as we go from penicillin to cephalexin, Keflex, to Ceftin, cefuroxime, is that it's the side structure. So here's the beta-lactam ring. It's really a square, but there's the beta-lactam ring. It's these side chains that are going attaching to letter R here that really make the big difference. So the farther you get away, the larger the side chain, the lower the chance of a cross reaction, because your body's not identifying it as the parent compound, which is the penicillin. And also keep in mind that 90% of people who state they are penicillin allergic don't actually have a allergic reaction that would be life-threatening or cause any morbidity even. 90% of people who state penicillin allergy don't actually have an allergy. And while I don't mean to make light of that, the point of me mentioning that is we need to know statistics, but we also need to know to always ask questions. Hey, I see you're allergic to penicillin. Can you tell me what happens when you're exposed? And many times they'll say, oh, my mom or my dad or my caregiver said I got a couple little pink dots on my chest, that type of thing. Usually not considered to be a true allergy.
So in other words, if your body made an antibody, an IgE, maybe whatever one it is, an immunoglobulin that it was attacking this that created that reaction, this looks similar enough that it's going to attack this, but this doesn't look as much, so it doesn't attack that.
Yeah, and even cephalexin, I mean, of the statistics say if you have a penicillin allergy, a true penicillin allergy, there's a 3 to 10% chance you'll also react to a cephalosporin. The numbers are actually, probably much lower than that, but we want to be careful.
Yep. So there's a 10% cross reaction, 3 to 10%, depending on the literature that you read from here to here.
Yep.
All right. So I launched this poll here. Have you ever prescribed COSOP, TrueSop, AZOP for a patient with a sulfur allergy? They said I have sulfur allergy and they prescribe it. Yes, no, or gosh, I would never consider doing that.
A question that came in, somebody's wondering if topical betadine could be used to kill dendritic keratitis, corneal HSV. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say yes. Betadine is bacterial, viral, fungal, all that cytal stuff. And, I just not, the answer I would believe is yes, but I'm not sure if I would put the cornea underneath that, unless it was huge and they had multiple dendrites and so on and so forth. But betadine, I do it in the office for patients, but you got to get that steroid on board quickly because boy, it's toxic. It creates one heck of an inflammation. So
I was just trying to see if there's anything published recently on that might be illuminating here, but I don't see anything.
yeah, I don't mind doing it for a bacterial because I can get a steroid on there quickly. But I mean, boy, is it, I do it in the office. We used to do it, in our surgery centers and so on and so forth. I mean, it beats up the cornea. So it's 5% betadine is what's recommended out there. All right.
Not surprising results.
Yep, not surprising. Never would do it. No, let's talk about it. So here's the kicker right here. If someone has a sulfa antibiotic, maybe I should put the antibiotic in quotes. They're not allergic to the S in sulfa, right? They're allergic to this aryl amine group. Trace, is this the aryl amine group right here?
Yeah, so it's a misnomer. They're not. If somebody says they have a sulfa allergy, we're not going to say, oh, sure you do, and give them a sulfa antibiotic. But what we are saying is that the sulfa allergy is actually the misnomer because, as Greg mentioned, here is the sulfa structure. Patients are not actually allergic to the sulfa structure. They're allergic to this aryl amine, which is actually part of the metabolic breakdown or metabolism of Bactrim, the sulfamethoxazole portion. So in asking that polling question, what we were trying to get across is that, we have plenty of data I'm pretty much 98% no problem giving a non-antibiotic sulfa drug to somebody with a sulfa antibiotic allergy. And a better way of saying that, easier way, is if, the majority, probably 9.9%, 99.999% of people who say they have a sulfa allergy are allergic to Bactrim, which is the sulfamethoxazole portion. That's the antibiotic. So if someone has a sulfa antibiotic allergy, usually the Bactrim, they are usually fine taking a sulfa non-antibiotic drug, including TrueSopt, COSOpt, etc., because they are not metabolized the exact same way. You do not get the N-arylamine, that side chain connected to the sulfa structure down here on the left. You do not get that with the non-antibiotics. And remember, it may seem a little scary, but patients aren't allergic to the actual sulfa structure.
So let me sum it up here with this slide here. So is that if a patient comes in and they're allergic to this sulfonamide type of antibiotic right here,
Yeah.
here's that aryl amine group over here when it starts to break down what they're allergic to. As you can see over here, they don't have it. And this is important because if someone comes in with pseudotumor cerebri or they have glaucoma, if they're allergic to the antibiotic, do a test dose over here because these rings are close enough, but it doesn't have the arylamine group. But you could get away with it. That's why we've always got away. If they're allergic to like Bactrim, we've given them Trusopt and Cosopt without a problem. Over here, they're just not going to have a reaction. So you can give atropine. If they're allergic to a antibiotic, you can give them timolol, which is sulfate, neomycin. All these kind of have the sulfate, sulfite, sulfur structures that are on it. So basically, if they're allergic to the antibiotic, probably here, definitely here. We do it all the time. So you have that glaucoma patient or that pseudotumor cerebri patient that needs Diamox, but they're allergic to Bactrim. Give them a test dose, but it's safe, most likely safe. So
And
Trace, we're right at the time. Go ahead and make a couple comments, and I'm gonna move towards the end here.
Just the last ... I will say the reason once again why this is problematic is because all pharmacy software, inpatient and outpatient, will pop up that there's a cross reaction, and that is never going to disappear. And I never say never, and I never say always, but the FDA is never going to probably remove that from the literature or the package inserts. So we have to know how to deal with it if a pharmacist calls you or whatever.
Joe, are we caught up on questions?
Appear to be caught up. I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for attending. We want to respect everyone's time. This is Challenges and Controversies in Prescribing Pharmaceuticals. I hope you found it as enjoyable as I love working with Tracy and having these dinner conversations. And I hope you found it helpful. And tomorrow when you go see patients, hopefully you can take some of this knowledge and use it, because that's Joe and I's kind of goals to help everyone out whenever they go into clinic the next day. Joe, any comments you want to make on the talk, or any final thoughts that you have or things that you do?
Yes, I thought this was a very high-end talk that was eminently understandable to people in the audience. I think definitely that people are gonna be taking something out of this and using right away. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Yep. Thanks, Trace. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Tracy.